You're listening to The White Rabbit, conversations on the art of presenting in a rather noisy world. Your hosts are Matt Krause and Alper Rosales. Matt helps leaders of international companies speak, write, and present with confidence. Alper is a communications trainer and a startup investor with a diverse portfolio of companies in Barcelona. If you like this podcast, please share it with friends and colleagues. Now, on to Matt and Alper for today's conversation.
Alper, I've got something on my mind, something that I want to go in today. How does that sound?
Surprise.
Surprise. Man has something on his mind. It's never happened before. The thing that I'd like to go into is the use of constraints. And you and I have talked about it before. So by the use of constraints, there's an initial kind of apocryphal. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that right.
You're asking me?
Yeah,
I've never heard it in my life.
Apocryphal. Okay, so basically a stylized event that tells a story and represents an idea. That's apocryphal.
Okay.
So not a few years ago, many years ago, I think it was probably 2015. So what would that be? That would be like almost 9 years ago, right? So it's more than a few. So about 9 years ago, 2015, a client of mine calls me up. And at that time, I was doing a lot of work in the neighborhood, so I was close by. He calls me up and he says, "Hey, can you come into my office?" So I go into his office and he's got this big presentation coming up. One of the departmental heads of the department, some big mucky muck is coming to town next week. And my client has to present, I don't know, his annual plan or something like that. And
Eight page slide.
Yeah, it's your basic
data.
It's your basic 80-page slide deck with a gazillion words and charts on it. So it's your basic hideous monster. Yeah, I'm sure you do. Yeah. So anyway, he's worked hard and he's got 20 minutes for his presentation, and he's worked hard and he's pared it down to 60 minutes. So we start doing some more pairing. And eventually we get it down to 49 or 40 minutes. And then we get it down to 39 minutes. And we pair, and that's as far as we can get it. We can't get it any tighter than 39 minutes. And if we get it tighter than 39 minutes, he's feeling like he's got to throw stuff overboard. He's got to, this is really important stuff he's got to kill off. Mm-hmm. So at that point, we had been in his office for a couple hours, and we're both kind of brain fried. So I leave and I go home, and he does the same. We come back and we meet the next day. And during the evening, I've had some time to think about it, and I think, what we need to do. Because I'm thinking about that Ernest Hemingway 6-word story. Do you know that story? The first sale, baby shoes never worn. You know that story?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I'll tell you for the benefit of our listeners who aren't familiar with that, I'll just go over it real quickly. There's a story that's I think was it about Ernest Hemingway. I think he's kind of whenever there's do this thing about writers, it's always Ernest Hemingway. He's kind of like
it's him.
Yeah,
it's him.
He's kind of like the.
I was at that table. He said,
"Yeah, yeah." So that he was there and he actually did it and he said it anyway. So the story goes that Ernest Hemingway is sitting at a bar in Spain, of course, with a bunch of his writer friends, and they take a bet amongst themselves who can tell a story in the smallest number of words. And one guy says I can tell a story in 12 words, and another guy is like, oh, I can do it in 11. So basically, they get it bid down to like 7 words, and this one guy says, yeah, I can write a story in 7 words. And Ernest Hemingway, he slams down his glass and says, oh, I can tell a story in 6 words. And everybody else at the table says, you're on, because they're like, there's no way that anybody could tell a story in 6 words. So Ernest Hemingway comes up with a story in 6 words, and he says, for sale. I think it was for sale baby shoes.
For sale?
Yeah, for sale baby shoes never worn. That was the story.
Yes.
And if you sit and think about that for a little while, that's a really good story, because there's a gazillion angles on that. It's like, why are the baby shoes for sale? And they're never worn. Did the baby die, or what happened? And so the story could go in your mind in a gazillion different directions. Anyway, so I'm thinking that for this client, instead of starting at 60 instead of starting big and paring down and then getting to 39 and getting all exhausted and frustrated and throwing up our hands and saying, hey, we're still 20 minutes off. Let's approach it from the other way. And I have no idea what's going to happen, but let's try approaching it from the other way. And so what we do is we take his 60-minute presentation and we sum it all up in 6 words. And anything that doesn't build on those 6 words is going to get cut. And so we start with 6 words, which takes all of about 10 seconds to say. Then we're up to 20 seconds and then 40 seconds and then a minute and 2 minutes. Anyway, we end up describing his entire annual plan in something like 15 or 18 minutes. So we actually came in under the budget. And we did all of this in one meeting, whereas we did this in the first meeting. We worked so hard and we only got down to 39 minutes. We were so far off and we spent the same amount of time. And simply because we tried this different approach, we were able to do it in, less time than budget.
Did you actually have 6 words count cap?
Yeah,
or was it like
that's how.
one sentence? or
No,
something
no,
like
it
that?
was a 6-word cap. I forget what it was. I forget what the topic was. Actually, I don't. I remember it quite well, but for confidentiality reasons, I can't say it here. But it was 6 words. His entire annual plan was distilled into 6 words.
Nice.
Yeah, and the reason that I bring that up is that how sometimes you're going in to see a customer. Let's say that it's your first meeting ever with this customer, and they're expecting a presentation about your company. And those presentations, the calendar defaults 60 minutes. So they'll say, your customer will say, there's 45 minutes. And you're thinking, I got to put together a presentation in 45 minutes. And it's really hard to come in under that 45-minute budget if you start big and pare down and get smaller and progressively smaller. So instead, I took this approach and use it now regularly. For years, I've been using it regularly with clients, which is that from the very beginning, we force some really serious constraints on the presentation design. And that's how we come to the message or the title for today's episode, The Use of Constraints.
Let me guess, in that scenario, the slides about us, the vision, mission, and milestones, they go out of the window, I assume.
Yeah, and because that's
as they should.
Yeah, that's how the presentation starts with all that stuff. Our mission, our vision about us. So the first constraint is that I'll say to the client, you walk into the customer meeting and the customer says, we're running behind today. Can you do the whole presentation in 5 minutes? And you have to say yes. That's the first constraint. Is you only have 5 minutes and then you have to leave the room. If it's a little bit over 5 minutes.
I cannot imagine what you say. No, I'm going to take my 60 minutes.
Yeah. Sorry, customer, but
good luck with that.
Yeah, sorry, customer, but you're going to have to rearrange your schedule because I need the full hour.
Yeah.
No, you have to say yes to 5 minutes. And then the constraints get even worse. Then I'll say to the client, or I'll say to my client, okay, not only do you have to do it in 5 minutes, you have to sum it all up in one sentence. You only get one sentence. You only get one sentence to describe everything to your customer. Okay, so there's the 5-minute constraint. There's the 1-sentence constraint. Another constraint that works really well is limiting it to 1 sentence per slide. And actually, this is one of the more advanced constraints because first you have to put yourself under the most serious constraint, which is that you have to describe your whole presentation in 1 sentence or 6 words.
1 sentence, yeah.
And then you get 5 minutes. And then if Matt really trusts you, if you've really shown that you've taken this thing to heart, then you get to the next constraint, which is 1 sentence per slide. And then you feel like the richest person on earth because now you get a full sentence for each slide. But still, that's pretty difficult to sum up each slide in 1 sentence. And in real life, these kinds of constraints, they're not going to actually happen, or they're going to rarely happen. But running your presentation through these constraints has a way of forcing message discipline. So by the time you get to see your customer, you're going to be so disciplined with your message that you actually won't need 45 minutes to do it.
You won't need it at all. By the way, one question. Do these 3 constraints that you listed, do they work in parallel with each other at the same time, or are you just trying them one by one?
It's kind of like constraints in decreasing difficulty. So first, it's like the most difficult constraint, which is to sum it all up in 6 words, one sentence.
In one
Yeah.
sentence, yeah. And then you don't need the whole 5 minutes that you
Yeah, you
mentioned.
don't
The
need
presentation is done in like
the 5
4
minutes. Yeah,
seconds.
the 5 minutes is actually the second one. So if you pass the first one, if you've buckled down and figured out how to do it all in one sentence, then I'll release the constraints a little bit and I'll give you 5 minutes. Okay, now you
Mhm.
have 5 minutes to do your presentation. How does that look? And then if they have shown that they can buckle down and can do it in 5 minutes, and that they understand the value of forcing these constraints, then I'll relax the constraints a little bit more, and then I'll go for the third one, which is one sentence per slide. So you've got to
Mhm.
become a constraint lover before Matt will give you the third and easiest constraint, which is one sentence per slide.
I don't know about the first two. I mean, I completely agree with them and like them. I don't think the third one should even be optional, like one sentence per slide. I think it should be international law.
Oh yeah, and that's actually an unexpected side benefit, because I kind of think it should be international law too, is that if you don't understand your material well enough to deliver your message in one sentence per slide, then you don't understand it well enough. And if there's more than one sentence per slide, you're probably dumping too much information on your customer, on your audience.
Hmm.
So and that this process of building a presentation under these constraints, this process has an unexpected side benefit, which is that often the clients start using this new constrained presentation as their default presentation, because it has a way of forcing a focusing of the message and adding a message discipline that
Hmm.
wasn't there before. And so typically what will often happen is that we'll be the client and I will be practicing the constrained presentation, and the client will finish the presentation, the constrained presentation, and then there will be a moment of silence, and I'll ask the client something like, what are you thinking? And the client will say to me, I'm going to use this as my default customer facing presentation now, because it has,
Because they like
yeah,
it.
because they like it, and it has forced this message discipline that wasn't there before, and they recognize that, and now they are going to start using it as their default presentation. One thing that I wanted to mention is that this exercise is highly reductive. It's difficult. It's not easy. Definitely do not pretend that it's easy. Don't go into it thinking it's easy, because it takes a very complicated subject with lots of nuances, your life's work
Hmm.
basically, and it reduces your life's work to 6 words. So it's highly reductive. All of this beauty that's made up your life for the past 10 or 20 or 30 years or whatever, all of this complication is going to get cut out and thrown on the floor in this process. You're going to have plenty of time. I mean, people ask questions, so your customer is going to ask you for that detail back. They're going to want to continue talking about it, but that'll come after the
That's like the
presentation.
best outcome.
Pardon me?
Yeah, that's like a very good outcome
Yeah.
if you are getting questions.
Yeah, that is a very good outcome. If the customer is engaged enough in what you're saying to be asking questions, then you should consider yourself blessed. But yeah, it is very difficult at the beginning, because it is very highly reductive. There's no way around that.
Can I play the devil's advocate?
Sure, go for it.
I agree with everything that you said. For the sake of argument, let's say I did this heavy use of constraints. I redacted my presentation.
Mhm.
I go in front of my client and I say, I'm going to respect your time and not going to take too much to do the presentation. I summarize it and do the whole presentation in under 5 minutes.
Okay.
I'm so proud of myself. I'm also making Matt proud, because as his student, I have placed this constraint on myself. And the client says, that's it? That's all you have for the presentation? So what might have gone wrong if I get that feedback or pushback from the customer?
If you get that feedback from the customer, see it as an opportunity, because if the customer wants to know, is that it? Then the next words out of your mouth are, what would you like to know? You're drawing some questions out of the customer. You're finding out what the customer wants to know about, because you have absolutely no reason to question, like you have enough knowledge to talk on this subject for hours. So if the customer wants to know more, just find out what the customer wants to know about, and then feel free to talk for a gazillion hours about that if you want. So by summarizing, and when people hear the word summarizing, they think, oh, I've got to take these 10 or 20 or 30 years of knowledge that I have, or whatever you have. I've got to take all these years of knowledge that I have, and I've got to summarize them in 6 words, and then I'm never going to get to admit to any of the complications or the nuances or anything that's made up any more than the first year of my life. That's not the way that it happens at all. You get to sit there, and now that you've given let's say your presentation is now 10 minutes, you get to talk for 30 minutes about all of the complication that got left out of the presentation. So it's not like the complication goes away. It's just that it's not in the presentation.
Okay. And would it be safe to say that you do this and you're going to ace the sales meeting? You're going to get the sale or have the customer to pick you?
Absolutely not.
Or is there more work to it?
Absolutely not. This will not get you the customer.
So it's not a magical wand.
Yeah, it is not a magical wand at all. You should definitely not think that this approach is going to magically make the customer pick you, because that is going to depend on other things, just like it would have if you delivered a 45-minute presentation or a 20-minute presentation or a 10-minute presentation or a 5-minute presentation. However long your presentation is, if the customer picks you, it's still going to depend on stuff like your offer and your brand and who you are, and is your company culture a good fit for their company culture? There are a lot of things that aren't in your presentation, and whether you get the business is going to depend on that. This is not a magic wand or silver bullet at all.
Okay, but you will have created a good differentiating factor.
Yeah,
if you use these.
That's true. You will have created a good differentiating factor. The customer will associate you with someone whose thinking is so clear that they're able to describe their message in 10 minutes. So there are many knock-on benefits. There are many benefits to this approach, but it's do not think of it as a silver bullet that's going to get you the client all the time.
Okay. Well, we are running out of time, but in one of the future episodes, I'm going to ask you to walk the walk, or what's the English phrase for putting your foot in your mouth?
Put your money where your mouth is.
Okay, no feet involved. Okay, put your money where your mouth is. And I'm going to ask you, under heavy constraints, to tell us about, okay, what are those things that we should focus on then? I mean, if I'm going to constrain my presentation, like sum it up in one sentence or give the whole presentation in 5 minutes. And since towards the end of our conversation today, we acknowledge that it's not a magic wand, there are still so many other moving parts that will determine the fate of the sale or the meeting. I'm going to ask you to tell us more about those, how to use those constraints and actually maybe build the presentation outline itself.
I like this, a challenge. Okay, I'm looking forward to it.
Me too. Me too.
All right, well, thank you very much, Alper, and I'll talk to you next week then.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to The White Rabbit with Matt Krause and Alper Rosanes. You can subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, iTunes, or through your favorite feed.